All right, so you have your new account set up. I have learned a couple things the hard way that I want to show you here to make sure that your account is working properly. So let's walk around the environment here and see what we have access to. So click up here on Home on that little breadcrumb link. If you're brand new to Azure, then you won't see anything here in the middle for resources, and you'll probably see a different set of services across the top. Because I already have an account, it's got my most recently used services up here and a list of resources that I've created down here. The one I want you to look at is subscriptions to make sure that your account's set up properly. So right now, for whatever reason, I see my credit card subscription, but not my new Azure for Students subscription. I think you should see one, and I'm not sure why mine doesn't. I notice I have other accounts that I've used before. I teach at a variety of universities depending on, well, the time of the year and other things, but here I've got a Washington account and 100 credits available, and when I go to my subscriptions on this account, I can see my Azure for Students starter. It actually creates two accounts for you when you sign up for it, Azure for Students Starter and Azure for Students. Azure for Students Starter is a set of free services that is separate from your $100 credit. It's not even showing my $100 credit subscription. So the subscription is just basically a way of paying for these cloud services that are available on Azure. So you may see something called Azure for Students and Azure for Students Starter. Just know that that's how they separate or differentiate between the $100 credit and the other free services. But for whatever reason, they don't show them both here on mine. However, when I go back to my other university account, let's go back to Home once again and go to my subscriptions. It shows my credit card, which I use for, it's my research card that I pay for Azure services like a database and some other things as part of my research here. And I do have an Azure for Students Starter and Azure for Students account, but for whatever reason, they don't show up here at all. So to make sure that we have access to those, and we will have access even though it's not showing up properly right here, I want to make sure that if you already had an account, you may need to log out or sign out entirely of your accounts, close out all of your browsers, and then sign back in. And then I think you should be fine. So I'm going to go back here to this first screen that we saw after we set up our account. All right, so here's what we have, a list of options that are part of this education platform that are either free or can be used as part of your $100 credit. So what we're going to learn through this series of videos, we're going to focus on these machine learning models. And there's, as you can see, a lot of great tutorials, a list of resources. We're going to learn how to create workspaces, compute instances. We're going to do that in the next couple of videos, learn what all the different options are and so forth. But I want to start by, I'm going to close this out and, oops, go back to education just so we're all in the same place. All right, so I want to start by creating my first machine learning workspace. There's a couple ways to do that. I noticed that we could click on this same link that I was at before, create a workspace, and sign in directly to Azure Machine Learning Studio, and this bypasses the portal entirely. Now the Azure portal is where we see all the other cloud computing resources that let us make apps, that let us create databases. Notice here my URL for this site has changed. Let's see if I can move my screen here. There we go. We're no longer on portal.azure.com. We're on ml.azure.com. And we can create our first workspace right here. And it has a subscription set up. Notice it's showing me all three of those subscriptions I mentioned here. Azure for Students, which has the $100 credit. Azure for Students Starter, which is a list of free services, and the credit card that I have on file. Now, I would not recommend, by the way, that you put on a credit card as a subscription unless you've used Azure before and know what you're doing. I've had students accidentally rack up $1,000 to $2,000 bills on a credit card and then get mad at me for it because they didn't know what they were doing. Please do not do that. So notice that if we use Azure for Students Starter account, this Machine Learning Studio is not, or the Machine Learning Workspace, whatever you want to call it, it's not something that's available under the free set of services. You have to use your $100 credit, which means Azure for Students account to use that. All right, we can close that out. Let me test and see if that comes up. If I go to credit card, no error. If I go to Azure for Students, no error. It's only if I go to Azure for Student Starter, it says, no, you can't use this resource. All right, so this is one way we can create this. I'm going to go back to where we were before. And another way to create the exact same thing through the Azure portal, again, notice we're now on portal.azure.com. Another way here is to go to the main Azure portal. If you don't see Azure Machine Learning right there, you can just search for Machine Learning here in the list of services. Notice they've got their old Machine Learning Studio Classic. That's not what we're creating. That's free, but they're phasing that out. We're using this one right here. It might show up over here. I'm not sure on your screen where it is, but we want this Azure Machine Learning. So this says, okay, you have no workspaces set up to where you can perform Azure Machine Learning and learn all of those resources that we saw in that other view. We're going to create one, a new workspace. This is another way of doing exactly what we just did before. So you can either do it from this view, or we can open up a new tab and go directly to ml.azure.com. Just showing you so you can see ml.azure.com. And that lets us sign in through our student account and takes us back to that same spot. Either one is going to allow us to do the same thing. Looks like we do get a few more options over here. I'll let you decide how you want to do it. I guess I'll do it from the portal here because I think that's more common for people that want to get used to learning the Azure portal. All right, I'll kind of compare them here too. So back from the portal, it says, what do you want to use? We're going to use our Azure for Students. And again, these two options didn't show up for me until I totally logged out of my account, closed all browsers, opened them and signed back in, and then they showed up. So now that I've got it, I'm going to make a resource group. I'm just going to call this Student ML. So a resource group, create new, Student ML. Notice it won't allow you to create spaces, so don't try that. A resource group is a way to tie together a bunch of services, cloud services in the Azure portal. For example, I've got a machine learning studio or machine learning instance. I could also have a live database that I want to pull my machine learning data from, and I could put both of them in this student ML resource group. So it just makes it easier to find when I'm navigating through the Azure portal. So workspace details, student ML is fine with me. I'm just going to allow the defaults. It's going to create a new storage account, Key Vault, Application Insights. These are just other support services. You'll have to have a storage account for us to upload CSV files to Key Vault for creating authentication. These are just some other services. We're not going to worry about a container registry right now. We can always create one later if we need to, but we're not going to get into that in this moment. All right, next. There are some details that we can get into that I don't want to discuss for now. I'm just going to review and create. So again, this is the same process that okay, here we go. It says, here's the review. Same process as if I had come over here, but it doesn't give me quite as many of those details. It just auto creates some things that it thinks we might need. I'm not even going, I can click on workspaces here too, by the way. Anyway. I'm going to close that one out and come back here and say, yep, this all looks good. It's the same thing I would have created either way. Initialize deployment. And I'm going to pause the video and let this thing finish. Okay, deployment is now complete. We have a machine learning workspace. I'm going to go to the resource. And this is the details about the resource that I get from the Azure portal. So I'm going to go all the way back to home again. And notice I have now a new resource group and a new machine learning workspace. I can click here, go straight to it, or if I were to go to Azure Machine Learning, it would now show up. Oh, and of course it doesn't. Sometimes you have to really refresh these things. Eventually it's going to show up here. I might have to sign out and sign back in again, but man, this is kind of a common bug I've seen with Azure. Anyway, I'm going to go directly to the resource right here, and it's not the resource. We're not at the workspace yet. This is just the details, including who's able to access it, other properties. Just don't want to spend the time getting into all these right now. But importantly, this is our direct link to ml.azure.com to go straight to the resource to use. So here's where it will now look like that other view that we had a moment before when we went straight to ml.azure.com. All right. I am not taking the survey right now. We're going to skip that, and instead I'm going to stop the video here, and we're going to proceed in the next one with creating our first compute instance so that we can start with the designer.